Over the past decade, there's been a palpable shift in the perception of the role that buildings play within a city. This shift has moved sort of in two separate directions. On the one hand, some perceive that based on our crises, buildings are thought of as part of quantitative solutions to adding needed residential or commercial density. On the opposite end, some perceive that qualitatively, adding the right kind of density that accounts for long-term environmental and human effects are fundamental. Our next speaker, Professor Gail Brager, is someone intimately curious about the qualitative aspects that most deeply affect the health and wellness of human beings, emotionally and psychologically. Her work seeks to uncover the sensorial and experiential opportunities to forge direct connections between people and their immediate settings and natural environment. Gail Brager has a PhD in mechanical engineering and is a professor of architecture at UC Berkeley in their Building Science, Technology, and Sustainability program. Since joining the faculty 40+ years ago, Professor Brager remains passionate about teaching and conducting research to help both people and the planet by minimizing energy consumption while enhancing indoor environmental quality and occupant experience. She recently co-authored a book called Experiential Design Schemas, Intersecting Building and Health Sciences with Architectural Design. This work aims at expanding the joy and power of connecting buildings with nature as a strategy to address physical, emotional, and psychological well-being. This will be at the heart of what she shares with us today. So please join me in welcoming Professor Gail Brager.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today and to transition us from two fabulous presentations at the city scale to now the scale of people. And I hope what I talk about today resonates with many of you, whether you are here as a design professional or you're here just as a local community member and wanting to figure out how can your home or workplace affect your own well-being. So let's start by unpacking what I mean in the subtitle of this talk, sensory delight. So we all know what landscaping is. I like to think of sense-scaping as a way of intentionally creating spaces that are going to enrich our sensory experience. And these images are chosen because they are intentionally, I intentionally think about them as spaces that are not defined just by the geometry alone, but by how the sensory qualities actually shape the way you experience and think about those spaces. So I'd like you to imagine with me for a moment, what would life be like if we ate the same foods at every meal, if we never experienced changing weather or qualities of light, if we only heard constant monotone sounds, we had no music and bird songs, we had no art in our lives to delight our visual senses, I think we can agree that that would be awful. But that is essentially what we are doing when we create buildings that are designed to be static over time, uniform over space. I call this experiential monotony. And there is nothing pleasurable about it. And the irony is that it actually requires a lot of energy to create those constant uniform conditions. But it does not have to be that way. So I believe that we can transform our built environment to move from common practice, what I call conventional realities, and I want to emphasize that these often start with very good intentions, but fall far short of creating more enriching experiential possibilities. So here are some examples of what I mean by those conventional realities. One I call the neutrality fallacy. And this is where particularly the engineering discipline, which is where I come from, but I teach in architecture, actually sets a goal of creating buildings where nobody notices. And if nobody notices and nobody complains, then that's success. But maybe we can notice, but in positive ways. Right? We also have an increasing disconnection to nature, which we heard about so beautifully this morning. It's estimated we spend 90% of our time indoors. I hope that statistic does not apply to any of you. And our indoor environments are increasingly disconnecting us from nature. So that's what I'll be talking about a lot. We also have what I call the conditioning monarchy. This is where centralized heating and cooling and lighting rules, and we've taken away the ability of individuals to control and moderate their own environments, particularly in the workplace. And all of this has led to an addiction to air conditioning. Now, don't get me wrong. I know air conditioning is needed, particularly in Los Angeles and many other continually overheated places in the world, but the idea here is we should use it when and where it is needed and no more. So I think there's three things that are going to move us towards healthy delight, three fundamental attitudes. One is that I think we need to move away from neutrality and create places that have rich, multisensory, variable environments. Now, what do I mean by variability? Variability can be spatial, which means sounds and smells and light and thermal conditions vary slightly across space, or temporally, which means they change in a room over time, or maybe you move in a sequence across spaces and your own experience changes temporally through your own movements. I think we rely far too heavily, particularly in our building standards and policies, in language that is about reducing the negative. Yes, we have to reduce heat and cold stress and loud noises and obnoxious smells and air pollution. That is necessary, but I would argue is not sufficient. And we need to move towards a language and a way of thinking about not just reducing the negative, but enhancing the positive. And finally, we need to think about buildings as not just barriers between the outside and the inside. And we need to think about the envelope of buildings as more porous boundaries that blur those divisions and create a connection between the natural outdoor environment and the indoor environment. So I want to introduce two terms that do just this. Biophilia. Bio means life. Philia means love or fondness. I think that we all have an inherent, profound love of nature and how it makes us feel. And there's a strong connection to environmental stewardship, that we tend to care for the things we love. So if we can engender a love of nature in our children, they will hopefully grow to take care of the planet. The next term, biophilic design, is about how do we bring some of those warm, yummy feelings we have in nature into our indoor lives, particularly important since we spend so much time indoors. Now, this is simple, but it's much more than just having houseplants. Connection to nature is about the variability of natural light, being able to watch the sky and the passing weather and the sounds and the smells. It could be as simple as just opening a window and feeling the breeze of outdoors. And so I'll be talking a lot about this in some of the examples I show you. Now, while it's beyond the scope of this talk, there is an enormous body of research that looks at the benefits of biophilic design, of nature connections, physiologically, psychologically, cognitively. This is just one example of very early classic research that showed that views of nature can have significant impacts on reducing the time to heal, reducing our need for pain medication. I think relevant to everybody, whether we have an unfortunate episode where we've had to be in the hospital or whether we are trying to age in place, where we're going to hear a lot more about that later. So what I'd like to do in the time remaining is show how I have embraced a lot of these issues in a recent book called Experiential Design Schemas, which is about how can we really center people's experience in making design decisions. It's about bridging the very data-driven language of building science and engineering, which is my academic background, and the more poetic sensorial perspective of the architect, which is the background of my co-author and also the context in which I've been teaching. So what is an experiential design schema? A schema is like a pattern. It's a way to intentionally orchestrate form and space, these elements of variability, to create a very specific experience, centering the person. I think naming is really important. It gives us a language to talk about experience, which is really hard. So we've created 45 of these design schemas for the book, each one presented in this 4-page consistent template where we talk about the experience, we have precedents, we give design guidelines and research evidence. 170 beautiful photographs. We're visual creatures, so we want to be inspired by precedents, and we've been very deliberate in trying to provide a range of residential to commercial space, civic to public space, things that people can relate to. And we've also created about 130 original diagrams in the book, ranging from things to try to represent conceptual ideas to redrawing research evidence to really focus in on what's most compelling, to looking at design guidelines and typologies. So with that, I want to give you a whirlwind tour of just a few of these schemas, and I've picked ones that I think will be particularly relevant to residential applications and ones that anyone could do. So let us start with light, because our visual sense is the dominant sense for most people. So I like to start with this one. Sequence is one of the categories we use to emphasize the idea that our experience is not just about standing in one place, but how we might move between spaces. So this schema named Light and Dark Precession is about how, as you move between spaces, light intensity can vary, not just to help adaptation when you move from the bright outdoors to the dim interior, but also to enliven architectural elements. So in this Hill House in Scotland, you move into a darker stairway, but then very quickly start moving to lighter areas of the softly diffused landing, and then this bright south-lit sitting room. But I love the idea of what you can do in your home by just dimming and flipping switches. Right? It's about operation. It's not about doing anything. When you sit down at the dining table, what about if you dim the surrounding lights and really just use light to change a sense of scale and to focus in on the intimacy of the dining table as a gathering place for friends and family. There's things you can do by just being aware of your space and modifying your surroundings, and to just not get away from thinking about space as geometry alone. All right, now, field trip, anyone? This beautiful home in Greece, probably more extreme than what we all get to experience on a daily basis, but while the other schema was about spatial variation, this is about thinking specifically about moments in the day, dawn and dusk, morning and evening. Where do you spend time in the morning and the evening so you can align yourself with the changing light of sunrise and sunset and their lunar equivalents? Think about that in your home or your workplace. Are there places you might sit differently to enjoy your cup of coffee or your glass of wine in the evening? Now, these are about moments, but why does light affect us? This is really interesting. Circadian health, we have found, affects people who are blind, because there's this other photoreceptor that was discovered just a couple of decades ago that is different than our visual receptors. And what this image is showing is that throughout the course of the day, both the light intensity, but also the color temperature of the natural daylight changes. And what this does is it affects the release of melatonin and serotonin, which affects not only our sleep and awake cycles, but also affects many biological functions in our body. So if you're spending a lot of time indoors, it's really important, especially like first thing in the morning, make sure you get that blast of circadian stimulus. And in the evening, maybe, dimming the lights or having redder lights. So the change throughout the day is what's going to have a big impact on our health. All right, let's move to thermal. How many people have been to the Rome steps? Yeah. So one of my favorite schemas here, thermal enclave, is about creating a sense of scale of a smaller pocket of warmth or coolness that contrasts within the larger ambient space. I think the hearth is a classic example of this, where we're used to gathering around the campfire or the fireplace in our homes. And Frank Lloyd Wright did this beautifully in the Winslow house, where right across from the grand entry to the house is this ingle nook, which is narrowed, and the floor is raised and the ceiling is lowered, and you've got these cushioned benches, and it's flanked by this heat-storing brick. And it's a way to emphasize both the physical and also psychological and social idea of the hearth and the gathering place. Warm climate example, I like to call Zephyr Spectrum, named after the god of the gentle west wind. This is about spectrum, creating a range of breezy and calm places that people can either adjust or adapt to through their movements. On the left is an example of a rare, naturally ventilated hospital in Singapore that does this both externally with these shaded walkways and also has louvered windows and small balconies in the patient room. And on the right, a smaller scale example of a porch with sliding screens and ceiling fans so you can vary the breeze and easily move furniture to sit where you want for privacy in different thermal conditions. So where Zephyr Spectrum as an experiential schema is about specifically having a range of air velocities, aperture engagement is related, but focuses more on how do people engage with and control those openings, whether it's the tectonics of Tom Kundit's work with this great, hand wheel and pulley system where you can open up this whole wall. LA's great for having just opening up and having restaurants that flow into the street. Or the smaller scale in your own home of, we all have open windows, but do you sit right next to them? Can you change where you put your desk and your seat for work or reading a favorite book so you can actually feel that breeze and have the scent of the outdoor air coming in? All right, let's move to acoustics. The examples I'm going to show you are primarily about water. I love thinking about water as an acoustic design element, but they are also multisensory. Euphonic water is about creating a gradient, a change of both sound and coolness as you move closer to the water. And this is a great example of one of the first pocket parks in New York, Paley Park, where this park with this waterfall where the sounds really mask the frenetic noise of the street above you. And again, movable chairs so that you can sit closer are farther away. Melodic materials is about translating the sounds of wind and rain into an acoustic experience. On the left, the Wind Museum. This is where the wind is the exhibit, and this place has slats, and so the sounds of the wind can either whisper or howl depending on the conditions. Or this rain-hearing pavilion in China, which is designed just to sit and listen to the rain on the different materials, the roof, the stone floor, or the basin as it fills. This is one of my favorite. Any building, any scale, any time. What do we often think of when it rains? Oh, we need shelter. We go inside. We close it off. But what if we think about how to engage the rain and have this contrast of dry protection while also enjoying the smell and the sounds and the breeze if it's a warm rain? And really just being aware of and engaging with it and enjoying this coziness of I'm dry, but it doesn't mean I have to ignore it. And how does that experience change if it's a drizzle or a storm? Where in your home do you sit when it's raining? And my very last schema, I'm just going to show one schema in olfactory. How many people have been to Pike's Market in Seattle? All right, then you will recognize the significance of this picture because you move through the flower section into the fish section. Talk about spaces that are defined by an olfactory experience. Well, what if you put your most fragrant plants? I have wisteria right outside the entrance to my kitchen. And so it's about a threshold. It's an aromatic transit. It's about a threshold or a passageway because we know that smell you adapt quicker than any other scent. So what is that threshold experience as you move into and out of a space? On the right is a living wall in San Francisco, which is accessible both to the public and the employees that move through that on a daily basis. And they have different aromatic elements that change throughout the year. So in my final slide, what do you do with all of this? I love encouraging people to just start noticing things. When I teach a class called Sensory Space, and my first exercises in the class are a series of what I call sensory consciousness raising. And they have to just become aware of animated architecture animated by the climate, and they do little videos, or they find ways to represent sensory experience. And if you go out and just start noticing the indoor and outdoor places and start paying attention to your senses and how they change throughout the day, how they change throughout the season, how do they make you feel? And then when you want to make decisions about how to remodel or just re-inhabit your own spaces, start with how do you want to feel? Are you trying to create a contemplative, relaxing space? Are you trying to create an energetic, joyful place? And what kinds of sensory experiences are attached to those different emotions? And with that, thank you very much.